What's happening? Benton here, driving and yapping. Just made the delivery at a Walmart distribution center, north side of San Antone. Now the Royal We headed for Laredo. Get loaded, head to Connecticut. And already talked to my dispatcher, and we're on the same page. I'm not planning to drive all night. Things appear to be looking up. Did a little bit of research on as far as the Google Maps reviews of the place I'm picking up the load at. It looks like it could be some slow loading, although they are not open Saturday and Sunday, apparently. According to Google, who knows if that's the case or not. But my appointment's 3 p.m. It's already 2:48 right now. There's no possibility of getting there by. Actually, my fault. It's 3 p.m., which is impossible. And that's one thing about places that take up to 6 hours to load people, or overnight, I guess, during the week. They are maybe a little less concerned about me making it there on my appointment time, which again is physically impossible from my perspective. And then it's a matter of, are they going to keep me long enough to do my 10-hour break there, or now am I looking at trying to have to go to the truck stop? And if so, I'm probably inclined to just go ahead and spend the money and reserve some parking, because the last thing I want to do is be one of these poor bastards waiting around at ungodly hours of the night or the morning trying to wait for somebody to leave so I can fight 5 other people over a parking spot. Not interested. I'd rather spend the money. It's interesting. I'd say a good 3 times a month I probably pay for parking that I never even use. Or I get there and it's like there's free parking, and sometimes it's actually easier and less likely to get blocked in with the free parking. So it's like, well, I guess I paid between $15 and $25 for nothing. I'm glad it's available. That's all I can really say. That's one of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of Love's is it's effectively impossible to park at many of their locations because of, especially the smaller ones, since they don't have paid parking. There's certainly not enough to go around in many areas. But, headed to Connecticut, assuming we can manage to get loaded here. The Royal We, of course. I figured I might as well do some yapping. I'm still tripping out from my perspective, my big old round face on the thumbnail. I guess I got real used to the thinner face, but I got to say, I feel way better now that I've managed to put on a little bit of body fat. It's certainly age appropriate. I'm 50, if folks are not aware, and it does seem like the body, whatever the design may be, the creative force of what I am, subverted into creating delusion and making this place. As far as I can tell, that's what's going on. And then the aesthetics around enjoying being lean and having muscle tone. It's like, yeah, I mean, when do I look myself in the mirror? Number one. Number two, I do tend to, my thin face, for whatever reason, I'm more likely to get, you know, eyeballed and followed around by people, public, which to me is just really an indictment on how sick the society's become, and sort of the emphasis on male looks, right? And I do understand, since most of y'all only really see me, in the pictures, and a lot of you don't care, but I typically just take a selfie or two, and then that's the thumbnail. It's not like I'm, if I can get halfway proper lighting so that my eyeballs don't look any blacker than they already are, you know. I do have really dark eyes, but dark brown eyes, and that's it. I'm not trying to, no filters, although I'm sure the phone probably applies some kind of processing. I'd really prefer to have a proper digital camera and just get a little more of a raw, unaltered view, right? I got freckles as far as I know. It's like, I don't, I can't see like and the wrinkles. It must be getting rid of my wrinkles, right? I went to actually took a shower, stopped the presses. I took a shower this morning. I was looking shaved, with my clippers, knocked the beard off, and I'm looking at around my mouth, and I'm like, yeah, I think I got a couple of new wrinkles. Probably I'm frowning too much some of the time. Ah, shit. Some fucking rock truck looks like he's throwing rocks all over the road. I got no interest in that. So, sorry, Bubba. Now I'm cutting people off, but I got no interest in Rock City. That's what that is. We're gonna hang back till we figure out. Might be rock. Looks like wood chips, maybe. Trying to see what's coming out of his trailer there. Yeah, I think that's paper or wood product. I've been hit by too many damn rocks and too many damn rock trucks. My time. Better safe than sorry. Did I miss? Oh, I missed the fucking turn. Fuck. Motherfucker. How bad. Fucking A. Wonder how far off course we are. What you get for yapping? See how bad the damage is. I don't think it's too bad based on the time it says for the delivery. At the perfect glare, I can't even really see what's going on. Yeah, I don't think we really hurt ourselves too bad. Fuck me. Is that an interchange? Now I've been fucked up. Does it want me on the interstate? This is weird. Some of these roads get real fucking weird out here, man. Looks like it's a clover leaf. Oh, hang on. I think I must have just barely missed it. So if that's the case, it's probably only going to add about 5 minutes. I don't know why I thought I was not going to have to make any more turns, but for some reason that seemed to be in my mind. Shout out to Texas and the fact that they have a lot of highways, a lot of roads. Shouldn't be too bad. It's like I got to do like a double doing like a double, went through the clover leaf twice, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah, this is actually not too bad, all things considered. Yeah, it's not too bad. There was construction back there. Hopefully, my exit's open. Now, this is where this is where not restarting and the 70-hour clock starts to become a factor. It's like, if I start creating delays for myself, it'll make it hard to make this delivery. On Tuesday, I believe it is. So all day, drive a full shift Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Going to need to average about 650 miles a day, which wouldn't be a lot if my cruise wasn't 68. I don't know. I get tired of holding my foot down on the floor to get to 71. Now, what's it doing to us? Is it still want us? Okay, never mind. Never mind. Thank you for your patience. Let's see. Yeah, I must have just missed it too. Funny how that instinct kicks in. Wait a minute, something ain't right. Oh, boy. Okay. Are we taking 35? Part of this is I should probably know what. Okay, well, that makes a little more sense. Should probably pay a little more attention to what interstate I'm going to be on the majority of the way to Laredo. Yeah, it's 35. Now that I should know from memory. I think what happened is I got confused looking at the map earlier. For some reason, my brain decided that 35 doesn't go to Laredo. Which is strange to look at a map and come to a conclusion while looking at the map when I probably would have guessed that from memory. The mind playing tricks on me, apparently. I don't know what's going on up here. These people are driving crazy. Somebody going real slow. What it is. Towing a trailer. Looks about half drunk the way they're driving. Yeah. Ay, 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 ay. Thought I was going to get spiritually attacked at the Walmart DC, but thankfully it worked out. A lot of Walmart's internal fleet are these real like anal retentive, what we used to call it back in my day, these real anal retentive type of drivers. And yeah, I probably added about 10 minutes to this whole thing, looking at where I'm at. Yeah. Added about 10 minutes. I can live with that. And when they gave me my dock assignment, I rolled around that side of the building and there was a trailer dropped in front of my door, my dock door. But it was weird because it was pulled out from the dock a few feet because, they have everybody drop their trailers in the door and then disconnect and go drive around and park in a separate area. I'm like, all right, I'm going to have to go to the shipper office and find out what's going on. And unlike a lot of truckers, it's a pretty tight, it's not a big spacious DC. Well, unlike a lot of drivers, I'm not going to just block everything with my rig. So I'll take a few extra minutes. I'll find an easy space to back into, and I'll walk my happy ass up there. And, in order to do that, I needed to go in through the outdoor, meaning, go the wrong way where it says do not enter, but, not a big deal, number one. Number two, I'm just going through there just long enough, to back in. And if I was going to go all the way around the building the wrong way, yeah, that I could see that being an issue. So of course, as soon as I'm trying to do that, one of these Walmart employee truckers, with the I forget what these are called, but the big like Dale Earnhardt style visor sunglasses, uh, as soon as I start to make my move to set up, he's turning in his bobtail, and I don't know where he's going, so I just stop and wait, being courteous, and in recognition of, hey, I can understand he's probably not planning for me to be going the wrong way, so we'll go ahead and wait for him to do his thing, and probably he's just going to back up and attach to one of these trailers anyway, and he'll be out of my way. It's like the guys wanting to stare me down from the other side of the Dale Earnhardt glasses, Then I remember to, kind of remind myself not to get spiritually attacked, maybe go into some out loud prayers. I was trying to manage too many things at one time, so I ended up just defaulting to Psalm 23. And then I just kind of started laughing, because then he just looked kind of ridiculous. I mean, if he was mean mugging me, but I'm pretty sure he was. Like, you can kind of tell when somebody's staring you down, even if they've got glasses on. And, he's probably mad about his own life in some way, dissatisfied, I'm assuming. Fair enough. Maybe leave me out of it, Bubba. Thank you. They can't drive around San Antonio. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. And as much as I'm critical of more conservative types, or I've said that a lot of the worst drivers is MAGA, but man, them lefties in Austin, at least on 35, good God, that's one of my least favorite places. And yeah, it's bumper to bumper. It gets real congested certain times of the day. But I mean, when the traffic's flowing and you can drive, it's 3 lanes, most of it, but it's like walled in construction zones. And it's just horrible. And how does Texas pay for all this, I wonder? Do they really got it like that economically? The waking dreams, surrealistic unreality, deja vu all over again. Like, who pays for all of this? Right? State of Texas. I guess they probably fairly sound financially, I'm assuming. City of Austin pays for some of it, I guess. Federal funds, pays for some of it. Interstate, whatever the interstate highway system is all about. They seem to be rebuilding and slowly rebuilding a lot of the roads in San Antonio, as far as I can tell. I don't know if y'all have any thoughts on the matter. Benton City Road. See. Well, so far so good with this third dispatcher. He seems to be flexible, and I think a lot of what these guys care about is, when we do all these partials, like let's say I end up with going to 3 different places to get loaded, and have 3 separate deliveries. I don't really care. Why is my voice cracking? I don't really care. It doesn't really bother me. Because the backing, if it's a tight place to back in, that's, I'm going to struggle with that, or, it's going to take a minute, or people are going to try to spiritually attack me. That's going to happen no matter what. That's potentially more times that could happen, I guess. But, and since these dispatchers, the majority of their income apparently is commission based. So this is a big part of how they make their money. And it seems like, if you look at a monthly basis, like what is this truck costing? This is a 2026. I don't know. I have no idea what the financial backing of this company is, but if it's really just this dude and like 25 trucks, and he's the, sole owner of this thing, then I'm assuming this truck is financed. And, maybe, who even knows? Maybe the financing and the order of the truck, the financing, and all of that goes through ahead of time. And then the next thing you know, we're 4 to 5 years into what's considered a recession in trucking. And am I boring you? Sometimes I wish I couldn't see how many people were watching, but this is not my normal time to stream. And I don't know that it even matters at this point. I'm just, we're driving and yapping. It's non-tent. Whoever wants to listen, feel free. This might not even, I might just unlist this when I get done. But, so if you look at whatever this tractor's costing on a month, look at what they pay me, right? So, how much profit, it's probably, I don't know that they're making that much money, really. I guess that's where I'm confused. How much does this owner operate, or this, whatever you call him, entrepreneur, small fleet owner, operator, I guess, what's he got to make on a truck in a given year? What kind of salary is he trying to take out of this thing? How much of any money it does make is he putting back into the business? As we know, costs are rising across the board and continue to rise. I know a lot of companies, or some companies at least, have chosen to, maybe run their equipment a little longer before they replace it with new equipment. And then, some have expanded so rapidly that, they're really just going to have to do everything they can to tread water and stay in business. But what I can tell with this fella is he seems to be hell bent on busting his own ass and really working hard to make this, to make an actual profit versus just trying to stick around. So what I'm bringing this back to is, if the dispatch is willing to, if I'm able to work in ways without complaint that makes it easier for them to make their commission off of me, and then I'm not asking a lot in return, but at a certain point, it's like, hey, if y'all keep making me drive all night, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit for the third time. So I think that's a factor. And then he was able to work with me, so that I didn't end up trying to pick up and deliver loads on Christmas Eve and on potentially Christmas Day. And I got to drive both days, lest we forget. That was a big deal, too. So not only did I not have to try to go pick up or deliver on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, I got to drive, on what I like to drive. Wake up loaded at the truck stop, drive about 500 miles, call it a day, park at a truck stop, wake up and do it again the next day. And now I'm going to have 3 straight days of that, although I'm going to need to run out my 11-hour clock as much as possible, which is fine. I don't mind doing that. It does make the parking a little more challenging. What's up, Bluto? Winter fat. Yeah, I mean, there's something to that, I would say. And part of it, I think, and Bluto may be a little behind in the stream. So thank you for getting me back on track, because that is what I was talking about before I missed my turn. So thank you for that. I do appreciate it. And then I completely forgot what I was talking about. But so thank you. But I have been threatening to do some proper fasting here for a while, which I do suspect is what's going to be really required to sort of bring it all home. Fine points on this healing and restoration. And I really want to restore my digestive system, as much as possible, which I've abused my entire life. That's undeniably straight up abused my own digestive system. And I've been putting it off, but I had a valid reason, because, when I was stuck at 120 pounds for a year and a half or whatever that was, it's like, well, am I really going to fast? I mean, it didn't seem really plausible. What am I going to do here? And I would say the love handle region. I don't really have a belly. I got a little bit of fat in my midsection, but with my clothes on, I got a flat stomach. But we're getting a little bit of the love handles are have come in nicely. Which again, at the age of 50, even a guy who's trim and in shape to some extent, probably supposed to have some love handles. I would argue. It just seems appropriate. It goes away by April. That's a good point. Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, I did manage to be quite thin last winter, but believe me, that was not my goal. In fact, I'm pretty sure I was eating more calories. That's the crazy part. It seems like, my ability to absorb nutrients has returned, to the extent to where I'm pretty sure I'm eating less calories and still putting on a little bit of fat. So, and I definitely needed to put on some muscle in my legs. That was a bit of a mental and spiritual exercise to be able to cope with, I've never, as skinny as I've been in school and in high school, I was pretty athletic, so I've never had scrawny legs. And to have fucking toothpick legs for that long was pretty fucking unnerving. So, and like the other day, I kind of accidentally brushed up against something. I was like, oh yeah, I put on a little bit in the the lats, the general vicinity of my back lat region. And I never entirely lost that, thankfully. And I can still do a couple of pull-ups. That's another thing about gaining weight. It's like, if I could bang out 5 strict pull-ups, then, I need to be, I'd say if I can gain 20 pounds and still be 15, if I can gain 15 to 20 pounds and really 30 overall. But yeah, I think I was like 130, 135 for a minute. And then I seem to be settling in around 150, at least for the winter. And as long as I can still do I did 2 pretty easy the other day. As long as I can still do 3 pull-ups without struggling too bad with the weight gain, I'm happy with that. And fit in my 30s. Well, that's a lot of caveats there, but it'll do. fasting seems like it would go. And I've done some fasting. I've got a decent amount of it, and I mean actual fasting, not intermittent fasting. A lot of people have, a lot of folks by now have experience with intermittent fasting, and then they seem to have dropped the intermittent and just call it fasting. But I do tend to specify. Um, so I mean, like but I don't really want to go beyond 72 hours because I don't. I've done enough extended fasting. It's a pain in the ass getting your digestion kick started after such an undertaking. So from what I've seen, you're pretty good going 72 hours and then just eating normally versus having to, some sort of step by step, start off with maybe a little bit of fruit juice or bone broth or whatever, kind of just gradually ease into eating. It's not really my forte, I don't think. I think I'd rather just keep it 72 hours max and then probably eat for a couple of days and then do another 72. I think that's going to be the way. The way to go. Autophagy, is that what they call that? Autophagy. The scientific process of the body kind of like consuming itself in a way, getting rid of the old, bad tissue. Now we got somebody that won't let me pass them, but as soon as I get into the slow lane behind them, they'll slow down. But then if I pull out the pass, they'll speed up. What is this, man? I can't really go 68 behind them, but now there's a big old line developing behind me. I'm trying to pass 71. Maybe we'll get around. Let's see how it goes. And I don't know if anybody saw. Apparently, there's a controversy lately with some soccer player, football, and I couldn't tell. I was just listening, and I saw the pictures, but it's just Maradona, maybe, or one of these guys. I don't know soccer players. Or it might have been David Beckham, but I think he's older now. Whoever it was, couldn't tell, and I think this was from several years ago, and he had gotten real lean, and you could see all his abs, and he even had, you could see some of his individual leg muscles. So he's real lean, and had a lot of muscles on him, a lot of muscle definition, but he wasn't real big and bulky. And I think it seems like people being on steroids and PEDs and the rise of the fitness influencer and all of this, I think it's really because people were commenting and saying that he doesn't look good, or apparently a lot of people saying, like women saying that's their least favorite body shape or whatever. And I figured out something that I watch a lot of this Greg Doucette. I find his videos entertaining. It's just purely entertainment. And I do enjoy hearing his thoughts on things. But, what I realized just from watching the pictures, looking at the pictures, is it's because he doesn't have a lot of mass and he's so lean. And like Greg correctly noted, if the guy put on some body fat and then in clothes or with a shirt off, everybody would think he had a good build and looked just fine. It's gotten to where we're now used to the bodybuilder aesthetics and these people on all of these drugs that typically when we see a guy with that lean, he's almost always got way more muscle mass on. He's like way thicker. So I think people don't know how to take it, right? When it's like, oh, he's, 160 pounds, or I don't know, he might be 175 pounds versus, don't we all remember years ago when a lot of guys started hitting the gym and then there was this talk of, well, I just want to look like Brad Pitt from Fight Club, who was like 155 pounds in that movie. And, pretty lean, but didn't have a lot of bulk on him either. Didn't have just a lot of bulk muscle mass. So I found that kind of interesting. And then I correctly noted, and Greg he knows a lot about it. And that's what Greg said is, yeah, if it's really because he's too lean. If he goes to 10 to 15% body fat, which is normal for a man. And I would say, and like Greg said, and I think this is the case, and I'm probably closer to 18 at this point than I am 15. I'm definitely nowhere near 10, which is fine. But, a lot of people are going to feel the best in that 10 to 15 region for men versus trying to maintain what this guy looked like he was 5 to 6%. It's just too fucking lean. He's going to feel like shit unless he's on drugs. If he's eating restricted calories to stay that lean, he's going to feel like shit. Myself being that 125 pounds for so long, yeah, I was eating food, but I feel way better now at my current weight. And I rest way better. And I realize now that a lot of that truck driving in my illness, a lot of that waking up and hitting the road at midnight, 1 a.m. was just the state my body was in. I just really wasn't able to really rest properly. I could sleep, but I couldn't just lay there and like get the actual deep rest that the body needs, I almost feel like I'm hibernating at this point, at least for a couple of hours a night. I'm going into hibernation. It's another reason I don't want to drive all night. Let me take all my herbs, let me drink my dandelion tea and, get real drowsy, and I'll wake up a few times and I'll either fall back asleep or I won't, but I'll just lay there and get good rest either way. That's all taken away from me if I have to drive all night. And I don't give a damn if I get my 6 to 8 hours of rest and then I wake up and even if I have to hurry through my morning routine, I can always, as long as I can get my shopping done, I can make my egg drinks and, throw my fruit in bowls and, rinse it off and, get everything in place and hit the fucking road, Jack, and drive 11 hours. That's what I'm going to do for the next 3 days. Maybe I'll stop at a Walmart, maybe I won't, but got enough food. Probably I will, because once I get to Connecticut, even if I'm able to get to a Walmart, the last one I went to, man, they just don't have anything. I don't know how many Walmarts y'all have been to in the Northeast. And that might have been in New York. I think that was in New York State. I haven't been to that many, but I've only ever been to really one Walmart that I felt like was just more or less like a normal Walmart. This last one I went to, they didn't even carry like half the things I normally buy. It's almost like another country in some ways. It's kind of what I would think like going to Walmart in a different country would be like. It'd be similar, but it'd be different in a lot of ways. In the Northeast there. It really wasn't worth it when I look back on, fighting the traffic in and out of there and based on the, few items they had. I got to stock up on my Mountain Valley spring water today. So that was good. I'm out of prunes though. I just ate the last of the prune. Oh, maybe I can sneak into a Whole Foods on the way up there. We'll see. See how clever I am. Shout out to the chat. What's up? Oh, we was Kangs indeed. Oh, Vikings. I like that. I see what you did there. Very nice. Very nice. Man, I just realized actually I'm having a little bit of the tinnitus or the tinnitus, a little bit of the ringing in the ears. I haven't had much of that lately. Oh, and I'll tell you what I got to do. What I need to do is figure out if I'm going to order some more Amazon products. This is a long enough run that I should be able to have something delivered. Oh, my boots, by the way. I got my boots, Merrill brand. I prefer the Solomons, but I've had like 5 different pairs of this one specific model of Solomons that I found on Amazon. And I just don't think they're available anymore. Can't find them anymore. And I don't like these, man. I don't like the way they fit, but that's, part of the game. Just ordering something off of Amazon footwear, I've never had that particular model. But in $150. These other ones were closer to 100 historically, but um, they got way too much ankle support. I'm not into the ankle support. And these Solomons, the older, and I think they've gotten rid of this with the newer ones too, maybe, but they had this sort of unique design where they were mid top, but you could lace them up like low tops, if that makes sense. And because I don't want or need the ankle support. In fact, I prefer not to have it. In my last pair, I wore them out and just had to throw them away. But I mainly got these for the waterproofing aspects of, and I always get sort of lulled into a thing with winter. I tend to forget that you're really looking at all of January, all of February, and then, maybe into March. That's really winter as far as truck driving and dealing with ice and snow. It's like, yeah, of course you can get snow in October, November, December, of course. And you remember, I don't run out west, so you can run into snow up in the tall mountains, even beyond that. Of course, I'm down south, and it's 86 degrees on the dash. But then, if you look at where I'm going down to the border. But I'm trying to think of it's been warm pretty much everywhere I've been right around Christmas. So it's not just because I'm down south necessarily. The warmer weather. wonder if that's EBT. I think I got irritated and banned EBT recently. I need to go unbanning. I don't even. It's funny. I don't even remember what irritated me. I mean, I generally I remember. Must have been in a mood. Well, and if anybody knows anything about me from years of live streaming on YouTube, I can't hold a grudge really. So that's also a factor. So, and I know certain people are going to pick at me no matter what. That's just that's just what it is. You know. I can have my own opinions, but about that, but it's just that's what it is, and that's what it's going to be. So, but then again, I might get my panties in a wad and ban somebody here and there too. Although to his credit, I think that's the first time I've ever banned him. I'm pretty sure he's just about the only one that I've never banned at some point. It's been an interesting time on YouTube. It's especially I thought about trying to retrieve my computer equipment, which may or may not still be retrievable. And what I've concluded is I would rather, as much as I would like to have access to that old data from my old hotel streaming days, I used to save a lot of other people's live stream, and so I'm not going to have access to that anymore. But realistically, how much time would I really spend going through all of that stuff? But I've already covered anyway. It's like, yeah, let's all watch a Beck stream, deleted stream from 5 years ago, right? 4 years ago or whatever. I mean, yeah, it would be amusing, but I mean, come on. I even had some of the really old. Um, what was I'm trying to remember what it was her. She called herself was some kind of play on Tyrannosaurus Rex, but it incorporated Bex, but it wasn't Tyrannosaurus Bex. I forget what it was, but and like I say, I was a fan. I really enjoyed her live stream, and if anybody even knows who I'm talking about at this point, so inside baseball, truth community type things. Uh, but realistically, how much time would be spent on any of that? I'd say not much. Yeah, it would be kind of novel to take a trip down memory lane to some extent. I don't know how much value there would be in that. And then, so what I've concluded is if I really want to have a proper streaming setup, it'll be easier just to buy all new shit. I mean, realistically. And it's not like it's that. I could get most of what I need for like $1,000. But then we also get into I have no plans to buy another car, and and I know a lot of people would say laptop, but it's still more bang for my buck going with like a mini PC. And I actually had I think I had 3 laptops, I believe. I had my regular streamer set up, and I had at least 2 other laptops. That's part of how I was saving so many people's streams. You know, multiple computers. Had like the war room set up to some extent in the motel room. I know when they came in there to spray for bugs or whatever, or just needed to come in for maintenance, I know they were like, what the hell? What's this guy doing? Not in a nefarious way, just like, what even is this? Microphones, fucking multiple screens, laptops, and cables running all over the place. Like, what even is this, man? Now we get into how early do I reserve my parking? It's Friday night. However, it's Laredo, so there is a lot of truck parking. And for me, paying it and going to the TA or whatever, or the Flying J, I think maybe there's a local place that has paid parking. Uh, it's really more of a convenience than anything else. I mean, hypothetically, I could figure out where to just go park on the street somewhere. There's so many warehouses and industrial areas in Laredo. And, obviously the cops don't give a fuck. And I'm not too worried about getting robbed or whatever. That can happen anywhere. I've ran into a little bit of getting the stink eye because I'm a white guy and don't speak Spanish. Because if people don't know, Laredo's like 98% Hispanic, and the majority of the populace speak Spanish, even if not as their first language. From what I've seen, and I do seem to have an ability to sort of just kind of be a little apologetic that I don't speak. Like, culturally, I seem to sort of be able to convey that, yeah, I understand you guys speak Spanish and it's way more convenient. I do understand as the gringo in this situation that y'all are accommodating me with the English to some extent, and I do appreciate it. I do seem to be able to convey that, and I think that's. And I'm not here to look if a white person or a black person born in America wants to have a hard line if this is America, speak English, go for it. It's just I've never really thought that way, and it's just what's in it for me. I don't see how I benefit. I mean, I know that maybe that sounds a little crazy. I'm not trying to fit in necessarily. And, you know, I haven't been anywhere yet where they didn't understand me to the point where we couldn't. We've always been able to get done whatever we need to get done. So what do I care if they would prefer Spanish? What meaning? I'm not. I can still sort of convey that. Yeah, I understand y'all are accommodating me, and I put thank you for accommodating. By the way, and I generally attempt to accommodate Spanish speakers if I'm able to, but like that one bozo recently that tried to interrupt me while I was backing into my dock. I was basically just had to tell him that I don't speak Spanish. But I kind of said it in the attitude of, hey man, you could fucking learn English enough to understand what I'm saying to you here, buddy. But he took it in stride. He was kind of like, well, fair enough. But he got a little mad at me. He got over it pretty quick. So yeah, and again, truck driving is so precarious. There's so many things that could happen to preclude me from driving a truck. But, and looking at it on a day-to-day basis, I mean, really, what else is there for me to do in the short term? I'd say the short to near term, the near to medium term. And I think in the longer run, with the continued, emphasis on spirituality and, the uncovering and the walking of the perfected righteous path that lies within, at what point is there enough of a cleansing to where it's just, hey, no more employment in the conventional sense, and then as little handling of money as possible? I don't know that it would be altogether reasonable to just go Daniel Sawello, the man who lived without money type shit. Um, and now, some version of doing that on a technicality. It's like, well, what if I did find some kind of living situation where I could sort of, do some work for some people, but not like there's been a weird thing apparently that's happened in the so-called truth community that I've heard about. And maybe this Nachiketa maybe fell into this to some extent. I remember him, I believe he started to tell a story. I don't think I ever got the full story. I've forgotten exactly where I was hearing about this, but maybe he had returned to America and in instead of maybe living more of a vagabond directly home. I'm just guessing, I'm speculating. Instead of being, just an actual homeless person, which I understand people not wanting to do that as someone I lived many years as an actual homeless person. There used to be a regular that came to my channel, and in fact has been on the panel here quite a bit, called JG. And if I ever slipped up and said I used to be homeless, he would always remind me that well, no, you are homeless. Fair enough, sir. You're right. Thank you for reminding me. But seems like I'm saying a lot more these days for whatever reason. I need to work on that. And there's been like what I would call like a work trade type of scenario, kind of a bohemian, communal, find some kind of new agey hippy dippy types, right? Touchy feely hippy dippy types, perhaps. But then a lot of those, they do skew a little more conservative, a lot of those types in certain ways. So I don't mean like lefty, more like homesteader, independent types, really. It's hard to explain, but I've been around these type of folks, and then so it seems like there's been some version of, well, I'll come stay with you, whether in the main house or on your property, and I'll do this work, and then it seems to always turn out that they're more or less used as slave labor, right? From again, the American dream to do more for less. It's hard to really work that out, to sort of provide somebody with a living, and especially if now we get food involved, and so without money, how do I feed myself, right? And then if you start getting into some of these scenarios of maybe finding some property where somebody maybe isn't there all year round, or they're gone half the year, and they need somebody trustworthy. Meanwhile, I'm not a maintenance man either, so I'm not even putting myself into the homesteading, out on the land type of thing. But a lot of these are the man, on the air quotes on the land type of people. And again, I was in versions of that, but in a different cultural context, in more of a West Coast hippy dippy. I actually was living that way at least part of the year. I would say 2014, 2015, 2016. And of course, especially when a couple of years when I finally convinced ex-wife number two to travel with me. And of course, she loved it, as I knew she would. But it was a lot easier to get invited into these situations. Having a charming, attractive woman on my arm, that always helps. But lots of experience in these matters. And realistically, what are you looking at then? You're looking at, can I meet somebody who's, either affluent or, close enough to affluent, who has some sort of property or some assets, and would on their own see the value and, oh, well, here's an actual person we can run a background check on that has no criminal history and it's not a drug addict and has never been in the mental health system. Yeah, he's kind of strange, but he likes to keep to himself. But he's, number one, trustworthy. And number two, he's a bit of an idiot savant doofus to some extent. But, when it comes to security and, not letting the place burn to the ground, we feel pretty good that he's going to be all right in that regard. Not cause us a bunch of problems. But then, if I'm dependent on them and here's the only way that really works is the person has to be able to grab their shit and fucking leave at any time with no hard feelings. Just, hey man, it didn't work out. I'm packing up my rucksack and rolling out. Which me and ex-wife number two were staying with some people she had met on her own when I wasn't around. And then, for whatever reason, they let me come stay with them in their house because my second wife, ex-wife number two, actually stayed with them for trimming season. I think that's how she met them. They needed somebody to stay at their property and trim weed. They had like 15 weed plants in their backyard in Medford, Oregon, which is interesting. And so then I came and hung out for a couple of months the next year. And there wasn't any real strife or anything, and I was going through whatever I was going through at the time. I finally saw the writing on the wall and packed up my rucksack and left a note, fucking rolled out. And I could definitely tell by then number two was ready for a break as well. It's like, all right. And that we were divorced by then, and for some insane reason continued to see each other off and on, which I knew was a bad idea and did it anyway. And not that anything really ended badly or went wrong. It was just, at that point, the hassle, the two-way hassle, it just simply wasn't worth it for either one of us. Turned into a two-way. Hey, what's up? Am I Benson now? What's up, man? Hey, I'm old enough. We had and I'm sure I've told you this before, but we had a TV show on American television. This black governor, I think. Was he a governor? He's a governor of probably some state in the Northeast, I'm guessing. Benson. Pretty sure he was a governor, right? Or lieutenant governor. Probably lieutenant governor. This was like 80s, late 80s, early 90s TV, I think. It's a good show. I remember at a certain point, the only joke I remember from the show was he was like a little guy, like a little skinny guy, kind of like George Jefferson, but not the same actor, different actor. And Will Smith's, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air's mom, the lady that played his mom on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was on there. And she got into it with Benson. And she was kind of rolling up her sleeves. She said, "You ever had your butt kicked by a woman?" And he said, "Not without having paid for it." Deadpan. And I thought that was hilarious at the time. Which is actually, I didn't really realize the politician tie in there, being into maybe potentially, number one, accessing sex workers as a John, and then potentially, potentially being into some kinky type things, like getting beat up by a woman that you paid, maybe. And then that's probably a good transition into some of the Nick Reiner stuff, which is actually on YouTube. Is becoming way more about Rob Reiner, if anybody's noticed. And apparently I was unaware of this, and I'm sure, again, it's a psyop, the Mandela affected folks will say it's Mandela, and whatever. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I identify as a conspiracy theorist, and it's all entertainment to me on some level. So it's all fucking fair enough. But there's a video on my post tab where they're breaking down some of the Rob Reiner stuff, and also tying in with Carl Reiner, Rob's famous dad, so Nick's grandfather. And there was a roast of Rob Reiner where they're pretty much calling him a pedophile. And it's not even really played for jokes that much. Like, how people are telling funny jokes, but then there's some truth to it, but then, it's really more jokes than truth. But this really was like more truth than jokes, it seemed like. And then you sort of get into the psyop elements of, why was this even put out in the first place? This does seem to be a little bit of kind of not predictive programming necessarily, but it does sort of a little bit of foreshadowing, perhaps. And then I know I've been talking a little bit about this Hamilton Morris, and remember, he has a famous father, documentary filmmaker Errol Morris. And Hamilton Morris has had enough of a career on his own. I would say he's sort of cursed / blessed into whatever this system of, CIA, Joe Rogan, podcasting, Vice News. Has Hamilton Morris ever been on Rogan? And I enjoy Hamilton Morris's content because, unlike most of the audience over here, I like researching psychedelics. I like talking about psychedelics. I'm probably done with psychedelics in my own life, but I've found them to be beneficial. I recommend nothing, by the way. I don't recommend anything. I did a lot of research before I ever took a psychedelic. I took it very seriously. I was 35 years old the first time I ever ate mushrooms. I would not do these things frivolously or for entertainment purposes. Although if people want to eat mushrooms or drop acid for fun, I mean, that's their business. It's not for me to say don't do that. That's not my concern. Why is my truck trying to go 67? I should be able to set the cruise at 68 and actually go 68. Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I enjoy those tie-ins too. We was Vikings, the O.J. Simpson bloodbath, Brentwood, of course. Now, I do think some people have tried to. They get a little too clever with it, trying to say, an O.J. and Cato was a house guest. That's true. However, part of that was that I believe he remained in the guest house after the crime, if I'm not mistaken. whereas Nick was arrested pretty quickly afterwards. But I mean, fair enough, you know. And and let me not let's not open too many cans of worms simultaneously. And I got about an hour till we get to this delivery, so or sorry, to the pickup. So I do want to cover some of this. Oh shit. Oh yeah. Google's reminding me that I might still be able to catch the $100 special $100 off coupon. I think that's good through today. Get $100 off of Google Pixel 10. Might have to do that. Anyway, so let me backtrack a little bit to the Rob Reiner. Apparently there's at least some circumstantial clues and evidence that who knows? Maybe, he was born into some kind of system of his dad. You get into the satanic ritual abuse. You get into the splitting of the psyche of a child, in a systematized fashion. You get into the literal, Fritz Springmeier, how the Illuminati create a total undetectable mind control slave or whatever. I used to have the actual title memorized. It's something along those lines. And let's see, where am I at on the phone battery? Oh yeah, we're good. So what would have possibly been done to Nick, and not by way of justifying the crime, just and then you get into the psyop aspects. You get into the bloodbath history of L.A. The L.A. Sheriff's Department and their tie-ins with Manson. And in fact, my mind would go to Manson before it would even go to the OJ stuff. Uh, just, but not as a tie-in. Just, I'm thinking more about court actual trials and cases that have taken place. Uh, in Southern California, and then who was involved, and there's at least some notion that maybe OJ's son actually committed these crimes, and that OJ was aware of it and sort of took the fall for it to some extent. Now, whether or not there's any truth to that, I don't know, but uh, who knows? But there's definitely and man, there's some real creepy shit with Carl Reiner. It was disturbing because and I haven't seen the video. I just listened to a lot of this stuff. But that video on my post tab, there was some audio. It sounded like Carl Reiner singing some kind of children's song, and I've got enough experience with mind control that it almost was like I took it as almost like a Duper's Delight version of Carl Reiner, almost as like an MK Ultra handler or somebody who was versed in satanic ritual abuse who may have done that to his own son, perhaps. And in the context of that interview, was singing this weird, creepy, almost like a nursery rhyme type of song. It's very bizarre. And apparently, South Park had gone in on Rob Reiner and some notion that, strongly suggesting that he might, have some PDF tie-ins. The whole thing's a fucking pretty sick, man. It's pretty sick all the way around. And again, none of this is to justify what Nick apparently did. And then the drug using culture of Southern California, and what I know of that culture firsthand or by observation and being around it, you know, these trust fund kids, it's basically normal for them to use drugs. I mean, it's normalized. And then we look at what goes on at these parties, and that if you really want to get into also that there's another video I shouted out the other day. It's the thumbnail is a cassette tape, and that guy talks about his own experience of being friends with famous people and even throwing parties where the famous people would have after parties at his house. But apparently, one night, if he was basically saying that he was hanging out with Bono, and after a YouTube show, and then at a certain point, somebody's like, "Hey, where's the after party?" And he was like, "Yeah, I could have said," because they looked to me, and if he would have said, "Hey, it's at my house," then he would have had Bono at his house. Which, yeah, I'm enough of a look. I appreciate celebrity enough. It's a big fucking deal on some level. Yeah, he's a douchebag. Yeah, most of them are at that level, but who wouldn't want to be able to name drop that on some level? But we're above it all right up until we're not. And then he's telling this story where he, for whatever reason, just decided. He told him, well, we're here, we're at a restaurant or whatever, let's just hang out here. But had his own sort of, charming way of conveying that. And so he goes through this whole thing about these popularity dynamics, and he ties it in with Conan O'Brien and Conan's podcast, which is all about what cool A-lister can Conan get onto his podcast, and then Conan can sort of have a slobber fest and do the majority of the talking, kind of kiss up to him publicly, and how weird that is in a way. And then the fact that what would have almost certainly been a mitigating factor, not to cause the crime itself of Rob and his wife being murdered by their own son, but the timing of it being that they brought their son to the party. But what this guy talked about was the sickness of especially somebody at Rob Reiner's level of fame and sort of just pull, and his own gravitas in Hollywood would have been, he probably wouldn't have had to ask. So it just sort of the ingratiation and the currying of favor. And so, number one, why is Rob even apparently, hey, Conan, is it okay if my son comes? And then kind of even the public humiliation ritual after the fact of sort of, now it pretty quickly comes out that Nick was behaving in antisocial ways. And then he gets into it with Bill Hader, who, I appreciate Bill Hader to some extent. I do find him funny. Me and him do share some similar interests. So, when I listen to him talk about movies or whatever, this is a person I could probably get along with and have some conversations with. But I've always been able to tell there's something a little off about Bill. There's just something wrong. There's something a little off with Bill Hader. I'm not sure what that is exactly, but there's just something wrong with it. And I think some of it is this layer of, you can tell he's very adept at managing the personality aspects and the maintaining a popularity, the sort of understanding whose star is on the rise, who's on the fall, how, he seems like he's probably very astute at sort of understanding where he falls in the hierarchy. And so, some notion of Nick Reiner, would have had some understanding of his own weirdness and the fact that he's not famous of his own accord, but he sort of is famous in a way. He's sort of blessed / cursed into this certain level of Hollywood, but then if he's dragged, which who knows, he may not have even wanted to go to this party. Now he's at this party kind of because maybe Carl's just sort of worried about, and I don't think Carl was worried about leaving him at home so much as it seemed to be that more Carl had an actual legitimate fear of his own son at a certain point. So the whole thing's already getting weirder. It's, Roman Polanski didn't invite Charles Manson to a party. You know what I mean? It's almost like now Manson's invited to the party type shit. It's almost, to me, it's not OJ so much as it's almost like it's like a 2025 version of Manson where now Manson is at the party, right? Except it's not Charlie Manson as some version of a white pimp, a dirty white boy dirtbag, because it's peace and love, man. And he's a late 60s Jack Talcott who's been coached up through the foster care system and being in spent the majority of his life in institutions and is so institutionalized that he, has an understanding of these sexual dynamics and how to, and by the way, back then, an environment where, and this is borne out, if you watch Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's right there on Front Street, that the fact that it was just okay culturally for a 25 to 35-year-old man to just hang out with 15-year-olds to some extent in a sexualized environment, and especially when Brad Pitt's character, this teenage runaway, an attractive teenage runaway catches his eye, and eventually, and there's a mutual attraction, and eventually he picks her up hitchhiking, which again it was a normal cultural thing. And in some way, he's kind of would have been a little rude for him not to pick her up. And then next thing you know, she's basically offering herself to him sexually. But then, in the context of the movie, of course, he does the right thing and is basically like, well, I'm probably going to need to see some ID or whatever. And then to juxtapose to work in the Roman Polanski, and if people aren't aware, his Sharon Tate, the Manson atrocity, at least one of the two atrocities occurred at Roman Polanski's house when Roman Polanski was in another country. And he was a very famous and influential filmmaker at the time the crimes occurred. And it was a big fucking deal. And he was in his 20s, I believe, and married to Sharon Tate, who was a big fucking deal actress, pregnant with Roman Polanski's child. And then, of course, we get into the sacrificial elements of this and the fact that Polanski, I believe at the time, now this is where I might get a little lost in the timeline, but Polanski got arrested and prosecuted for apparently sodomizing a 15-year-old, like at a party in a hot tub in Hollywood. If I'm remembering the details. And in fact, got such a sweetheart Epsteinian deal, perhaps. Because remember, Epstein, a lot of the Epstein stuff and people have forgotten a lot of these details. And in fact, I knew about Epstein before he was ever arrested the second time. I was already aware of his sweetheart deal, just being a conspiracy theorist at the level of enjoying conspiracy theories. But part of what happened of him getting prosecuted in 2015 or whatever was it was sort of this uncovering such a sweetheart deal he got, I believe, in Florida in 2008 or whatever. And just when that all came out, just like it's just not appropriate. And then once it got to be, oh, there's tie-ins with Bill Clinton and others, like, okay, this is really bad that this happened. And so the tie-ins with Polanski's own sweetheart deal, and then, eventually, and again, I'm probably not remembering the timeline correctly, but, and then eventually he, was a fugitive from justice to some extent. And, he's finally passed away, right? He's gone, I think. I'm not exactly sure, but I believe he lived the majority of his life in Europe after that, I'm pretty sure. And continued to make films because he was not from America and was not a native English speaker, right? So I'm pretty sure he continued to make films in what we refer to as foreign languages, foreign language film. So what's even going on here? So I see some of the Nick stuff is like, okay, it's Charlie Manson in a way, but without the entourage of underage broads and, without the sort of hippy dippy. Now his dad is the hippie and it's all in the family. Meanwhile, Rob Reiner originally got famous on his own for starring in the number one TV show in America called All in the Family. And there's roast jokes, and it's heavily implied that it was all in the family between Rob and his dad, and then possibly between Rob and his own, at least one of his own children, Nick, potentially. I mean, and so it's almost an homage to this is part of how Charles Manson is created in the first place. And then to what level is a Charles Manson operated by proxy for the system, on behalf of the system, in service of the system? And then to what levels could that operate as a Manchurian candidate? And then was Rob and his wife actually murdered versus, is he on the other side of the ice wall or or whatever that is, Many of us in the so-called truth community having been down those various rabbit holes, right? And I understand my mind is not the only mind that goes to these places. It's that I may have a bit of an advantage over some of the other so-called truthers in that I just was a little earlier to the party than some of the other truthers. Certainly there's many in the CBO crew who their minds automatically does a lot of that math also. And this is the great loss suffered by one Davy Crocco. And if anybody knows who Davy Crocco is, and I probably will leave this up for the replay crew. Yeah, Rafe Max and Loose Farming. Well, and it can be all of that simultaneously. We was Vicane, certainly. It can operate in a sickly parabolical way, right? Parabolical way. Why in diabolical is sort of the that's the term that's fallen into, it's so much in favor, it's gotten trendy, but is parabolical a word? Diabolical, is parabolical a word? I don't know. Maybe it ought to be. If not, maybe it ought to be, but I need to pull over and take my bathroom break. And I realize I've left my other earbuds in the back. I need to be able to swap when these die. I need to be able to swap them out. Apparently, using these as the microphone function is quite rough on the batteries there, for whatever reason. It's probably the active noise canceling. Also, perhaps. And so, and again, I'm shooting from the hip. It's off the top. Wow, there's not one single truck at this rest area. That's interesting. Yeah, so this load, I think they're probably just happy to have somebody come pick this up. What this indicates to me is there's really nobody headed into Laredo right now in the holiday, and especially the Hispanics being fairly family oriented culturally, right? Maybe inclined to spend a little more time with the fam over the holidays. Either way, bear with me just a moment, if you would. But yeah, it's like, to me, it's a version of Charlie Manson, the Nick Reiner, but then, and the bloodbath wasn't at the party, but, so much of this is not getting blamed directly on the party, but there's so much discussions of these Hollywood party dynamics, and then again the normie as baby truther, truther 101, and sort of and Chalk Body Outline has covered a lot of this over the last several years, certainly. The mainstreaming of these conspiracies to where it's in the zeitgeist, and your average normie is now pretty much a conspiracy theorist. And now, and at a certain point, Drew over at Chalk Body Outline would talk a lot about, one of the functions of a lot of the trans and a lot of this stuff is to get the right wing people exposed to it, even just by, oh, I forgot to grab the earbuds. How silly of me. Even if it's just to call it out and call it disgusting, now they're exposed to things that they really wouldn't have been exposed to, especially visually. And then, some people will be groomed by that. Let's just call it what it is. There will be an effect where, people will not necessarily want to become that, but, potentially attracted to it on some level, or, again, I don't want to get into details, but and we saw during the pandemic, I eventually had to make myself stop watching these videos, but I got into watching a lot of this Alex Rosen, this gigantic mountain of a man I believe he's in his 20s, but he looks a lot older, but late 20s probably. And he would confront these pedos, and a lot of them were MAGA types, but real ignorant, just dummies, intellectually. A lot of them are just it's not an excuse. A lot of them are intellectually, challenged, let us say. And after a while, if it was a right wing type of person, I knew that it was mostly involved Telegram. And Alex was real good at sort of getting them to, sort of spill their guts on how they got into this, and it was obvious to me that Telegram groomed them. And it's not to excuse their behavior, but at a certain point, I realized that the actual predator catcher channels, that becomes grooming. Because, and shout out to Drew at Chalk Body Outline, he helped me see that, you know, yeah, the informational side is beneficial, but to continue to focus on that information, yeah, I'm not going to be groomed by it. But however, like, why would I even want those ideas in my brain? You know, so it was insightful and beneficial to learn enough about it to then just move on and do, do not recommend channel. And now every time any of that content shows up in my feed, I immediately do, do not recommend channel. It's like, no, I'm not watching this. And it's not out of a fear of being groomed. It's that some people will be groomed, as sick as it sounds, by watching the predator catcher stuff. I mean, I know it sounds insane, but that is what's going to happen. And, it certainly shows how sick this system of things is. And again, you're listening to somebody who was raised a Jehovah's Witness. Okay, I never joined. I tried to believe it. It wasn't possible for me to believe that stuff. I tried really hard, actually. Old Benton was trying to be a good boy. And 89 degrees on the day. Kind of lost the point there, but it's all right. State trooper went by and for some reason caught my attention. So yeah, back to the All in the Family as far as the name of the show, and then it's basically in retrospect, it's now pretty much being put on Front Street. In my YouTube feed, which is fairly mainstream, videos are showing up to show me, all of these tie-ins with the Reiners and, Billy Crystal at a roast, basically making jokes that aren't even funny about just basically saying that Rob is way too interested in children. And then I forget the guy's name, but I believe, because I remember I'm just listening, but I believe it was one of these guys. He's a comedian. He was a stand-up comedian, but he was in The Usual Suspects. Kevin somebody, I forget his name. I know his face, but he's actually been in some pretty decent movies as a dramatic actor. But he told what is supposed to be jokes, except I don't think they were jokes. I think he was being serious. Again, a little too much truth, but he was basically talking about acting in a Rob Reiner movie, and that in order to get the role, he had to basically offer himself sexually to Rob Reiner. And then, I won't even get into the details of the way he told the joke, but again, I would encourage people to watch those two videos on my feed. It's if you're interested, and there's a lot there, man. There's a lot of meat on that bone, and yeah, I don't know that any of us in the truth community need to be reminded of just how sick and twisted Hollywood is. To me, what's instructive is to recognize that level of sickness and depravity now, whether, it's debatable whether or not it had fully inserted itself into all of, American life, by the 80s and the 90s, but it's inarguably it's there on display today. I would say that it's invaded all corners of American society. Um, and there were rumors of weird, bizarre stuff happening, like in my own hometown. Every once in a while, some story would come out about some weirdo orgy. Some people got caught having some weirdo orgy at the fucking, we had a historically black college in my town, something maybe involving the school or, also famously, there was a pipe bomb case. There was a guy that was setting pipe bombs in my hometown. And I actually went back and looked it up and looked at some of the news articles, and there was some weird tie-in with the federal government where he had some strange, and I've forgotten the details, but the pipe bomber had some strange doings with the government, and maybe got caught by the authorities at a certain point, and he got caught with like what sounded like bomb making materials in his car, and they more or less let him go. And just some weird shit like that I found just in like two articles. And now we're back to the waking dream, surrealistic, unreality deja vu all over again. This isn't even real on some level, right? It's not even altogether real on some level. The J way, well, yeah, and I'll concede that, and people will probably understand. I'm not, I'm more neutral on a lot of the J talk. I don't. I've personally not had any bad dealings with Jewish people. It's been fairly limited, but I find them to be, they are quite condescending, which it's not entirely unappreciated. If when conveyed in a certain type of way, I'm not necessarily offended, but I'm not easily offended either. But I'm pretty good at pushing back and kind of getting my own digs in anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Intellectually, I can sort of hold my own enough to get my own digs in, but with J's. But I will say the last conversation I had with a Jewish person was that meth head who was definitely under demonic oppression, who approached me at my car, and I had an interesting conversation with him. And he even brought up the idea of, which is a very much a Jewish thing, the literal poisoning of the water supply. He didn't bring it up in that context, but it was this idea in the past of maybe Jewish people like poisoning the Gentiles on purpose or whatever. And how much of that actually happened or not. But he referenced it in the context of a Jewish concept of, well, what about the person who they know they're fucking you over, and they're fucking you over, and there's nothing in it for them, right? They're just sort of fucking you over because they can, and then and he didn't say it this way, but from my perspective, like, it is synagogue of Satan type shit in that they, in some way, they know that, whatever Satan is would be pleased by those activities. You're just sort of, fucking somebody over kind of demonically just because we can, So then, people might give you a helping hand, right? As a Jewish person, I understand enough of their culture to where, if his problems with drugs, a lot of that's going to be, he's sort of cursed into this life and a culture where he's from New York City, but then now he's out in LA, trying to drive Uber and trying to chase his tail and renting an Uber. And now, that he can sleep in, renting a Tesla to do Uber, which sounds insane, except, well, if the person sleeps in the Tesla, I mean, it does probably become possible, except as we know, the Uber algorithm operates where it figures out they perfected this algorithm to where, they can control on average how much revenue what is the revenue of the Uber driver going to average out to on an hourly basis. And you're looking at it, it's looking to be about $18 an hour is what it seems to be. And so by the time you get expenses taken out of that, and even with an electric car, even if they're able to find free, like on the street charging, which is a thing in Southern California, potentially, you're still looking at $18 an hour once whatever it costs to rent a Tesla, and then, how can a person even live on $18 an hour? And then you get into, he's met a Jewish person, and then, this Jewish person is doing a mitzvah or whatever and renting him this room, maybe without first and last months and without a fucking security deposit. But then, I'm reading through the lines of like, I can already tell this is going to become some sort of a predatory type situation in some way. And then I'm also looking at the guy like, what's in it for this guy? And then, even if it's a helping hand, like, is dude going to is he going to clean himself up enough to where he's not, because it's pretty clear looking at the guy, he's on fucking mess, man. Now, not everybody can spot these signs, but at the same time, it's like, are people playing dumb, and then what's in it for the guy who's offering up his home or whatever, even if he's charging rent. And in California, the danger of, now you get into, once somebody establishes residency, they're not even really evictable in the short term, right? So if this guy can't act right, can we even get him out of here? It's all quite fucking strange, man. And I know I'm kind of rambling and not really making my points now, but I'm not even really sure what my point is. But, there's something there. And again, now we're back to, and I'm sure this guy's had a high salary at some point. And I think he was probably mid-30s, I'm guessing, mid to late 30s. And kind of a high testosterone kind of guy, real secret type of dude. Maybe had worked in finance or trading, aggressive, go-getter type. And I think probably falls victim to some of the, some of them want to abuse you type shit, where he ends up kind of offering himself up to the more abuser types, right? Which is it's a thing, man, in a lot of these hippy dippy circles, and especially Rob Reiner sort of being described and portrayed as a hippie. I've noticed myself in a lot of these spiritual type circles, we do get into elements of, predatory sexual dynamics. And I felt like this Jewish guy approached me partially, whatever I'm putting out at the level of spiritual attainment. And, I've been told by people at times that I've, putting out a certain type of vibe, right? That other, and the more certain people who might be attracted to a spiritual path, maybe they can sort of tune into that to some extent. But I kind of felt like in the context of this conversation with this guy, where it was almost like he was kind of wanting me to jump in and to almost provide guidance or whatever. And I would just have to be like, look, man, I can talk to you about this stuff, but I got, number one, I got my own shit going on. Number two, I live in a car. Number three, like, I'm not interested in, any sort of guidance or leadership anyway. Or like, no. And not that he was necessarily seeking that, but it's all quite strange. And when you see, so why was he homeless in the Northeast and in Texas apparently? Well, he never was homeless. He was a trust fund kid that got shipped off to rehabs, but not in Southern California. And then he left the rehab because he wanted to keep using drugs. Which, yeah, fair enough. But he, was he temporarily cut off from his stipend, right? Because if he didn't have if his actual trust fund hadn't kicked in yet, and he's, 30 something years old or in his 20s, and he's dependent on mommy and daddy for an allowance, he probably would have had to return to SoCal, right? And if he's going to want to keep doing hard drugs, he probably knew, well, he's going to have to scam and, manipulate mommy and daddy to get them to send him a few grand here and there. So the on the streets would have just been the nights that he wasn't able to couch surf. And then if the weather's not too bad and he's in Maine and he's willing to take methamphetamine and stay up all night, what's the difference? Where are the drug users at 2 a.m. in Maine? They're probably in Portland, Maine, on the fucking street somewhere, or they're at a hotel somewhere, or they're at in somebody's garage somewhere, right? So I don't know how much actual on the streets he ever did. But so, yeah, maybe he went on a weeks long meth binge, right? Now I'm wondering how he never got arrested. So, the chances of him having meth binges in Texas and never getting arrested, I mean, that seems quite unlikely. But then you also get into CIA, MK Ultra, the authorities, you get into Manchurian Candidate, you get into what level of protection is the system willing to provide, how much of his own, was he being operated by proxy? Again, if this was Carl Reiner singing this creepy song I heard, I got the bad juju fucking, almost like the monarch programming. I think that's what they call it. Monarch mind control or whatever, using certain key phrases. And you see like, famously like the example of, what's his name on Good Morning America, the black fella, Al Roker, the one that lost all the weight, and somebody said Holy Ghost, and he just froze and like almost like comically looked right into the camera like he's waiting for fucking his handler to give him instructions or whatever because somebody said Holy Ghost, And then my own studying of Spring Myers, undetectable mind control slave and undetectable total mind control slave or whatever the title is, and him talking about using like the Wizard of Oz or certain songs or certain phrasing and certain ways to communicate certain pre-programmed responses. Something I noticed myself when Once Upon a Time in Hollywood dropped was it was right near the time of that Bang Bang in El Paso at the Walmart, and uh, that shopping center is called Cielo Vista or something along those lines. And the Sharon Tate thing was on Cielo Drive in Hollywood Hills, I believe is where that's located. And in that movie, which I saw in the theater because I see almost all Tarantino films in the theater, and I was the only one in the theater, interestingly, but um, in Connecticut, actually. And I remember there was it was a very obvious the way the camera work was done in this Tarantino movie, and it prominently zoomed in on the street sign. And I'm the only person I've ever heard notice that potential tie-in to where things like that could even be used to sort of let one of these Manchurian candidates know that it's go time, right? So there's clearly a lot of this psyoping and a lot of these things. It's these dynamics are constantly being played out. Well, whoever you're saying I sound like is certainly younger than me. So in fact, they sound like me. Do you mean what I'm saying, or do you mean the sound of my voice? Because I'm assuming based on how that name is spelled, they probably don't have an American Southern accent. So do you mean my discourse sounds like something that person would say? Either way, thank you for your comment. And I would say if it's based on this, well, either way, they sound like me. I probably predate whatever that is as a boomer, a 50-year-old boomer bozo with a southern accent, born into a time warp in southeast Arkansas, the United States of America. Let's see where are we at. Still got 40% left on the battery. Ha! Howard Stern hypnotized Sal. Unbelievably creepy. Yeah, and again, since StreamYard has their little referral button, I can't quite read your whole comment, but yeah, there's definitely some weird shit around Howard Stern for sure. Um, and I was a pretty big Howard Stern fan. Actually. And, I was actually a big fan of his movie. His both of his first two books, which might be his only books. I don't know if that's the case. I caught a few episodes of his television show back in the day. The VHF and the UHF and all of that. You could actually, at nighttime, if you really were determined to fuck around with the rabbit ears, you could actually get some of that stuff. Maybe from Atlanta or wherever. However close to Arkansas that would have been beamed. Certainly not Little Rock, of course. I don't know. They might have played a few episodes of it early in the morning on whatever our local Fox 16 or whatever it would have been. I doubt it though. Yeah, not as a Fox affiliate. I think they'd have been too worried. So I doubt it. I'm trying to remember if we had kind of forgotten the UHF and the VHF and all of that. which was, I need to go look that up. There's really a fascinating history of over-the-air television in America, and now you get into the controversies around going to digital for the over-the-air, and um, as we pass the border patrol checkpoint, but it's northbound, so there's no southbound checkpoint. And here's another thing: this thing gets so backed up, although it's not too bad right now. I definitely prefer to go through this bad boy early in the morning. Yeah, it's not at all busy compared to normal. 28 to Laredo. And I do want to remind people, Border Patrol, this ain't white people down here. Whoever I talk to on my way out of town at the Border Patrol checkpoint, very high likelihood it ain't gonna be no honky or a regular black dude. You're looking at almost exclusively Hispanic. But yeah, back to the history of over the air. So now what I'm seeing is news articles about how, and as people who may not know, the number one television show in America is the NFL. It does the highest ratings for television. And as the lines are increasingly blurred between streaming and what's traditionally been considered television, now we're getting into the internet side of, is Netflix even able, if Netflix for the second year in a row has the, they get to do at least the NFL's Christmas, package. And it's increasingly getting split up. I guess Amazon has some of it now, I guess. I haven't really kept up with it. Whoever, it's gotten so splintered and fragmented who gets to televise the NFL now or stream it. Where I'm going with this is to recognize at what point is the public going to more or less say, look, you're going to have to keep this available over the air. You're just going to have to do it. In the short term, I don't know that the internet is up to the task. And, people historically were, they would tolerate some of it going to cable, ESPN or whatever, but, you still needed the majority of the important games needed to be on over the air or so-called OTA. And then, so that'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And what even is available over the air. At this point, it's been so many years since I even checked out what can you just get with a, one of them HD antennas and a El Cheapo LCD with a TV tuner. Like what can I even get? What will even come in, right? So that kind of becomes interesting at a certain point. We got Border Patrol and state troopers posted up out here. And when I rolled out of town last time, I could tell they shot some kind of beam into my eyeball from a car parked on the side of the road. Somebody fired a fucking laser at my eyeball. Whatever that did, probably some sort of biometrics. I could feel it too. It's a real thing, man. So, this idea that the fucking system doesn't, dude, they know exactly who the fuck I am. They know more or less what the fuck I'm up to. Right? This idea that, you had Israel Keys, the serial killer, and he was, in the military apparently, or at least tried to go into the military. I really don't know a lot about that case, but, the idea that he was just kind of freely operating in Alaska and other parts of the mainland U.S. and the mainland U.S. Come on. There's no fucking way, dude. So how much of that was him being operated, as some sort of an agent of the system? And, let me pat myself on the back and remind myself of the stream I did maybe 2 months ago, agents of the system, when I talked about, that I believe I can make the case that it's, more or less everybody functions as agents of the system, whether they want to or not, and whether they want to or not. And so then I started calling that a sysagent, SYS agent, sysagent. And then I tied that in with the term dissident, the concept of being a dissident sysagent. So once the individual understands that on some level, whether they want to or not, they are functioning as agents of the system, that they then could choose to perform that function in a dissident fashion. And I mean, based on the dictionary definition of the term agent and the term dissident, right? And, I probably could write a book about all of this, or at least, research it, right? Um, Maybe with a partner, perhaps. Well, and you are right. I am aware of that technology also. They're searching the inside of the truck, whether they're searching the inside of the truck or not. That's absolutely a thing. And Texas State Troopers, 100% on the record, have that technology. Absolutely. And some of that is for, human trafficking and smuggling and all of that, which, as we know, the system allows and facilitates on some level. Oh, and it has nothing to do with Biden. It was doing that way before Biden, you can rest assured. And most definitely. But yeah, and maybe that's what you meant by the whatever I felt going into my eyeball. You may, the poster may, the commenter may know way more about that than I do. Certainly, it's very much possible. Well, I'm glad I applied the Rain-X to the windshield earlier today, because we're getting hit with the bugs. The Rain-X makes the bug splatter clean off way easier. So yeah, this has been an interesting stream. I guess it'll probably end in the next few minutes. But yeah, I felt like we covered a lot of interesting topics, and in typical Benton fashion, not so much with the spiritual stuff lately, but especially if I'm just kind of getting into more conspiratorial truther type stuff. It takes me a little while to kind of get warmed up and figure out what I want to actually talk about. But we got there. The royal we. So thank you all for your patience in helping facilitate that. And again, my only real wish for people day to day within the system would be that they would think for themselves and respect, excellent, and to continue to continue to develop their own intellectual abilities or pseudo intellectual abilities. And if anything keeps Benton out of dementia, it's going to be, managing to continue to access certain compounds and, medicinal mushrooms and, certain types of nootropics and foods, but also, exercising the muscle of neuroplasticity to some extent as well. That's important. And, even if not just for the neuroprotective effects. And then, of course, consciousness raising. And I have noted that some of the so-called truth community is quite narrow-minded or just to put it another way, could be more open-minded if they chose to. And, I've found it beneficial in my life to use open-mindedness, as a way of, expanding consciousness, and also, meeting my own seeming need for, a certain level of, intellectualism or pseudo-intellectualism, right? In my own, idiot savant-like way. And so, if other people are able to do that, and they find it beneficial, not that I'm directly involved, but, maybe just a temporary inspiration, for folks who might want to do that. And I found it very rewarding, and I've received some criticism, and some of it's been appropriate. I'll take it to heart, but, um, I've certainly benefited as a result of developing myself intellectually, also intuitively, right? To really trust and and to me, it is a spiritual thing to sort of the getting out of one's own way to be able to access their own intuition, which I suspect, most, and I don't know that it's even the human side of things, but, maybe it is the spirit of what I am. But, if what you are is what I am, then, I suspect that individuals within the context of the vacuous, delusory, adversarial realm of business transactions, the world of death, the game of lies, while solving for and reconciling waking dreams, surrealistic, unreality, deja vu all over again. There are the dynamics of sort of learning how to get out of one's own way to let that intuition. And mine works in conjunction with my own analytical brain. And the more I've trained up those processes, and the more I've trained myself to get out of the way of that process, now I have, for many years now, been experiencing epiphanies on a regular basis, which seems to happen with the analytical working with the intuitive. And that does function as, the idiot savant side to some extent, shoring up potentially some of the shortcomings of the idiot side of the idiot savant. So anyway, if anybody finds any of that helpful, I'm going to get out of here. I might come back. I don't know yet. I need to at least charge the battery a little bit, let the phone cool down. But bye.